Welcome to the New Agility podcast. I'm here today with Addy and Chris. Today we're going to talk about a question that came into Addy. Would you like to introduce the topic, Addy?
Yes, indeed. So imagine a large global enterprise, and then obviously I was parachuted in to help them with their agile DevOps and various ways of working initiatives. And I was positioned in a department. I had my first conversation with the department head. The enterprise had a clear approach or clear enough approach strategy in terms of where they wanted to go. Now, I didn't know at this point how this message was communicated to everyone down the pyramid, so to speak. So I was having this conversation with the senior stakeholder who's in charge of the department, and then he said, "My boss wants my teams to be agile by next quarter. Can you do it?" So that was the question. I will let you think about it.
Say the question again.
My boss wants me to be agile in 2 quarters.
My boss wants me to be agile in 2 quarters.
Wants my teams to be, yeah.
Wants my teams to be.
Yeah.
So this guy was in charge of a number of different development teams.
Development operations, different types of
right.
work.
Okay. So presumably you had a conversation with him. I mean, I've got a couple of questions spring to mind, but why the deadline for a start?
So I think, like any other organization, you probably have, or you had a fixed transformation budget with some timelines, and promises were made up the chain saying that this portfolio shall be agile in few quarters, a division or a department, so on and so forth. So that obviously you can't run a transformation program or initiative into infinity. Every initiative has a start and end date, which may not align fully with the whole idea of of being agile is an ongoing, continuous effort. So,
yeah, that's a big topic. This whole thing about a transformation budget. I don't think it necessarily needs to, but you're right. That's the norm. Yeah. Maybe that's a topic for another podcast another day. We'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
It's too big for today. Did you get a sense of what he meant by make them agile?
I think probably one way to look at it is, I'm sure you heard the phrase, this is just another tide, this too shall pass. I think when you're in an enterprise, and if you're a long-term employee, then you've seen many waves of transformation hit you and your team. So most middle management would just say, "Oh, let's treat this as a storm. This too shall pass," right? So as opposed to
storm will pass. Yes, I mean, so it's conceptualized in that way, right? So here's an initiative that has to be done. It's got a timeline. There's a starting point and there's an end point. And it's interesting you say it's a transformation wave that hits the teams. And we've heard a lot about transformation fatigue.
Indeed.
So, I mean, in a way, it kind of, for me, it almost feels like you're set up for failure from the beginning. As a coach, how do you deal with it? But there's no point us, sort of throwing in the towel, because that is how engagements come, right?
Well, yeah, they do. But I think one of the things that strikes me, and again, stuff I've been thinking about a lot recently, is what if you've got an initiative that you have to go along with, and you have to manage, project management terminology, but you've got a fixed deadline, right? In the minds of some people, you have a fixed scope. There are a fixed number of things that you have to do to change, to tick the boxes to say, right, this team is now agile, right? And you have to do that with a number of teams. So the scope is fixed as well, okay? And you've got a fixed budget because you can't go beyond the deadline. There's only so much money. So you've got this iron triangle of stuff. Something's got to give. So in my world, like, how do you get that done that meets the expectation within those constraints.
But is it only about meeting expectations? Because I think the expectations are probably wrong from the outset. You know, in the sense that the value that they're going to get from Agile is probably not consisting of the things that they imagine to happen. And so
Quite
if we want to leave them in a good state and keep our reputations, we probably have to meet their expectations, but also give something else.
Yeah, indeed. I think there is a need to disrupt sometimes the incumbent thinking. I think as Agile or ways of working consultants, that's in many ways our job to do. Obviously, disrupt enough, but not so much that you get fired in the process. So, I
that
think
old delicate balance.
so there's
that's another thing, right? So again, you know, this when I'm saying set up for failure, you're kind of you're brought in, you're to some extent expected to follow the master's orders, and yet your job requires you to not do that.
Yeah, I feel like in those sort of circumstances, you're being pulled in two directions. One of you says, I know in my own head what this team needs. But on the other hand, there's the guy who says his boss wants him to be agile. There's an unspoken expectations there, right? And you need to at least satisfy enough of those expectations that someone says, right, good job, you don't get fired, tells your boss, well done. But on the other hand, there's this, how much have you really actually accomplished? Are they genuinely better state than they were before? That's a tricky one to do. So what's the approach?
I guess one obvious thing is obviously we need to earn our place or build our equity, so to speak, within the new enterprise. So we don't have the trust. So one way is just start looking at building, getting some quick wins. Identify some early adopters. Start.
So what could be an example of a quick win that would look good?
I think a quick win could be there's things where we in the past I've done where I've worked with a team who are more inclined to adopt as opposed to a more resistant team. Although the value could be in that resistant team, in that sense, the business value is probably there, but then you may want to pick a quick win and then help them adopt and then use them as a showcase, get some brownie points for the transformation, as well as that area get some peer pressure working through the organization so that others also start adopting ways of working. So that's one way. I've done that in the past.
What elements are we looking at though? What are the kind of, let's try and put some meat on these theoreticals. What kind of tangible things are we referring to?
Tangibles could be, you can identify, so for instance, on the DevOps and CI and engineering practices front, for instance, not just on the Agile, you can do a few quick practices that can be adopted. It could be just starting off with setting up a CI/CD pipeline. I'll be shocked in this day and age if you've got a team that still does not have a CI/CD pipeline, but you'll be surprised. I'm sure there are many teams. Again, you don't need to do a full 100% automation, but start setting things up, start amplifying those feedback loops, and all that is good feedback, right? So once you have that happening, start improving the cycles or reducing the cycle time.
And that's kind of easy to measure, right? You're simply reducing the time.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess I'm sure you can do similar things from a more process and methods and practices point of view as well. Just streamline.
What I like about that idea, Addy, is that it isn't of kind of one of those typical boring process things that most engineering teams hate to hear about. If you talk about CI pipelines and that feels like, yes, this is something I can get on board with. not, oh, there's a bunch of meetings I've got to attend. So,
Or you can, if you already have a team that's already, or teams already halfway through Agile, which is probably most likely the case now, that number of teams are adopting Agile in various forms. So it could be just dropping a practice that's not working for you, right? So do you really need to do a daily stand-up 15 minutes, which has just become a status report, a proxy for a status report, right? So it could be even dropping patterns and practices that's not working.
Yeah. So that's kind of like going in and identifying pain points of some kind. What quick wins can we do by removing some pain or other? And anyone who removes a meeting is immediately a hero, I think. So
yeah, one of the things I'm thinking of here is that Andy, what you said at the beginning is this guy runs a number of different teams, and the teams are actually different. They're not all the same kind of teams, the same size, doing the same work. There are differences there, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm thinking of is there's an immediate contradiction, if you like, because someone has in their head a single definition of what to them it means for a team to be agile.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I've got different teams doing different work. How they implement that concept is going to be different. All right.
Indeed.
So you can't just do like one size fits all. Let's have a few boxes and we'll tick the boxes there doing these things, because in some cases you're likely to, if not do more harm than good, you're liable to put some things in place that don't actually make sense, or just make their lives difficult for no particular reason at all. So I think the first thing I've done in the past with the team is said, what are you struggling with? If I could wave a magic wand, how would your lives be different? And if so, I wish I could get rid of this person, and I wish that would be different. I wish we had our own servers, and we had this and that. And you can say, oh, great, well, let's start. What's stopping you from doing that? And then you can start working through some of those to make their lives better. So at least that team is happier. On the other hand, there's a big part of me that wants to go back to that guy who said, can you make my teams agile? And say, what does agile mean to you again? What would you see that you would say, they're now agile? Tell me what those things are. And if he says, and I've heard this before, I'm like, well, if I see a lot of post-it notes up on the wall, then I know they're. And I think, it's like, okay, well, what's the effect of that? What makes them better by doing that? So they're looking for some sort of visual signals, I suppose. Not, because in a lot of the cases, those guys don't understand what agile means themselves. They've heard the buzzword, and as you said, it's a storm that's been labeled. And as long as I can get through that period, good stuff.
It might be that, but it might also be more profound than that. It's just that they imagine somehow that there's got to be something that they can measure at the end of it, and that's why they may leap to, okay, have they done training? Are they all doing stand-ups? Are they all in teams, etc.? They're going to go for those kind of structures.
Correct.
Because that's kind of evidence, right? So I wonder whether really what it's about is to say, whatever we do, we have to somehow show evidence of it, and not just after the fact, but to say, for example, we're going to reduce the time the pipeline releases, right? So we're going to reduce it. That's one of the first things. If you then can suggest those as typical examples of evidence, I think they'll usually be open to those kind of things.
Right. And so coming back to the point I was making, if you can have that conversation with a guy who, what does agile mean to you? And you can say, how would you know? If you can have that conversation about, well, what are the measures that you could see? And if it means that, my team are very slow, they only release once a quarter, we can say, okay, where would you want them to be? Once a month, once a week, multiple times a day. Where would good be for you? Then you can start saying, right, that's an objective, and you can talk to the team and say, right, my boss has asked us that, here's an objective we have. What would it take to get there? At least you can work towards something. You've got a goal, and you can go and meet that goal, and then you can ask, well, what's the next priority? That at least I think gives you a coaching approach. It gives you direction. It gives you some things that are agreed as objectives. When you have this difference of expectations about what does agile mean and to different people, it's all just in we don't really know what's good and what's bad.
Yeah. In fact, Chris, you use the phrase, "What would you do if you had a magic wand?" or something. I
Yeah,
quite like that. Not just in Agile, but any short consulting gigs where, like any typical consulting assignment, where you're asked, where say you're given a month or two to go in with a problem statement, talk to lots
yeah.
of people, do some data, right? While I do all of that, questionnaires and all, my favorite question is always, if you had a magic wand,
Yeah.
what would you do? And this is a question always put to the actual doers, if you like, people at the bottom of the pyramid, if you like. And
Yes.
then the answers are always amazing. People who are closest to the work actually know, I think, have already a lot of solutions.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, when you actually collect all of it and take it back to the top of the pyramid, uh, most cases you are surprised that people are not even having a conversation. Leaders are not even
Yeah.
having that conversations with people at the, and then I think you get a lot of quick wins right away, right? So yeah,
Yeah, agreed. I think there are a lot of things that, you know, companies hire smart people, right? You walk into an agile team and they're not idiots. At whatever level of maturity, I hate that word, but whatever level of agile experience they have, they're not idiots. And they have spent whatever time they've spent together basically doing whatever they can to make their working lives better, right? That's a given. But within the constraints that they've got,
yeah,
I think what can happen is if you come along and identify, oh, this is something you could do better. Um, have you tried that? You may find that on the one sense, it's like, we asked if we could have, be able to, I don't know, spin up our own cloud servers on demand, but we were told we can't do that. There's that aspect of it. On the other hand, it's like, well, we know we're not going to get it, so we haven't bothered to ask. So if those kind of things come out, it's all right. What is possible, and then you can have as you say, with the leader who said, "I want my team's agile." You can then have those conversations. Well, if you're going to be more agile, here's what they need to be able to accomplish. We need improved cycle time, which means getting rid of these constraints and so on and so on. Then you can start saying, right, okay, we now have some targets in place, and can we now accomplish those things by Q4 or
I
whatever?
mean, one of the slight reservations I have when you do ask people this sort of a magic wand question, they tend to put all the solutions on somebody else. Oh, if only those people over there could do X, Y, Z. And then management will say, well, they've got to sort their shit out first,
Yes.
and so I think that's all fine. But yeah, it's probably some of the questions are, what's within your power to change? What could
Correct.
you also do to improve your situation?
Yes.
But I wanted to, I mean, some of this is the question of idealism versus practicalities, right? We would love to be able to say, oh, let's just look at their pain points and let's pick up the quick wins and it will look good. Sometimes, it's more constrained than that. Sometimes the leadership will say, we need X, Y, and Z, no argument. You've got to do that. So how do you tread that line between, what is idealistically the right thing to do versus the practicalities to stay in the engagement?
Indeed. I just remembered a funny story, or it's not so much a story, something that really happened. I need to mask away all the details, but basically, there's this consultant in the team of consultants that we were in, and he was lined up with an initial interview with a stakeholder. The stakeholder wanted to make sure, sort of vet every consultant who was going to be in the team. And this is in the context of Agile. The consultant in question was a really experienced Agile consultant, really good, probably the best in that group, if you like. And the stakeholder's first question was to the consultant, what is Agile, right? And the consultant started playing coach from the first minute, saying, what do you think is Agile?
Excellent.
Stakeholder.
Yeah, but that matters.
At which point a
that
baseball bat
matters.
was drawn out.
So, and I think in this case, the stakeholder was clearly not prepared for this and didn't receive that, was not prepared to be coached as well or be prepared for these answers. And unfortunately, the coach, the partner was told to get rid of this guy.
Wow.
Well, I guess he hadn't had permission to coach this guy, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
That's
you
a very
can't
good
enter a coaching agreement with somebody who hasn't agreed to coaching, I suppose.
We should talk about coaching agreements. Maybe we should add it.
Yeah.
That's
I
another
think it's
topic.
on a list
Exactly.
somewhere. Yeah.
That's a very good point. I suspect that, and I've been guilty of this as well, and I've suffered consequences myself. When you start challenging someone, and they feel aggrieved by who are you to challenge me? You have now just held up a mirror to my ignorance. How dare you do that? Therefore, I can't have you around in case you do that again. You're too disruptive. You
Yeah.
need to go. So I think there's some of that in some organizations, and it is something we have to be careful of. However, I don't think the question was unreasonable. Maybe it was the way it was phrased, and I'm guilty of badly phrasing things a lot. But in that sort of situation, if we're going to be successful at anything, we have to understand what the objectives are. So the question I think was reasonable, but maybe it should be slightly different. So it's kind of just so I understand what's the expectations you have of me. What would success look like to you? Is a perfectly reasonable way to ask that question, I think.
I don't know. I think that was a pretty tone deaf answer, personally. I mean, if somebody comes up to a new coach and says, what is Agile? They may genuinely be asking, what is Agile? And by you saying, well, what is it? What do you think it means? It's like, are you having a laugh? I mean, we've hired you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a pretty. I mean, it seems evasive. It seems insulting, really. So I'm not surprised. I think that was a poor judgment by the consultant there.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was badly phrased. Yeah,
based on how you've told it, Addy, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some other details.
Permission to coach is a key point there. Probably we need to take that one level up and say, do we have permission to disrupt? I think we need to be clear on that. Sometimes maybe our mandate.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is not permission to disrupt. Is maybe to make a few small changes, not quantum changes.
But also disrupt, but by how much? I mean, if you're going into a company, you don't know the delicacies and the intricacies. You can't just go in and turn everything upside down. That would be very concerning for somebody in there who, if somebody comes in and says, oh yeah, I disrupt. I mean, you think, well, what the hell? That scares the hell out of me. What are you going to disrupt?
We all know change, organizational change is disruptive, whatever it is, right? And there are degrees of disruption.
Yes.
I think I might take a bit of a tangential detour here for a second, but I think we are probably reaching the end of the era of Agile in which our assignment is to implement frameworks. I think those days are gone. Moving past that, I think we need to start thinking about an agnostic definition of agility that is unique to given organizations, which implies that we have an understanding, a shared understanding between coach and client, if you like, of what agility means to them, what their objectives are, because a lot of people, we've all heard this, I've heard I need an Agile, like sell me an Agile. Okay, there's that. We need to get past that type of thinking, because there isn't one Agile. Even if you just look at the different frameworks out there, there's a number of them. Which one is right for you depends on what the consultants are trained in and often certified in, right? But that's not a way to improve organizations. We've got to make, I believe, we're that part of Agile history now where we need to start thinking about more bespoke, more pragmatic. Let's improve what you do. Here's what Agile looks like. Where are you? What do you need to improve to get there, kind of thing. So it's all about, for your organization, in your context and environment and culture, what needs to improve. And it's got to be, I think, the client saying we need to get better at A, B, and C. And yes, there's maybe a whole dozen other things underneath that, but there's got to be some understanding of a shared objective in it. Otherwise, it's just going to be a tick box implementing practices that may or may not land.
Adi, over to you for last words.
No, I think I know we started off with an interesting question. Can you make my teams agile? And I think that was a good way for the way you put it, Chris, in terms of maybe we need to have a common understanding of what we mean by agile and what does it mean in the context of your team or teams or portfolio or department, right? So, and then we can work towards it, given the various constraints that we all have, right? Be it time, cost, and scope. Yeah.
Great.
And also other constraints. Sorry, I know you said this is last year, but I've probably mentioned this before, but you take within one area, you've got two different teams. One of them have got 17 people in them, and they're all doing exactly the same job, right? The single function. And they're doing that with 8 different stakeholders. They don't have a single product owner. So the other team have got only 2 people. They sit side by side. They're running a single project each, right? You can't just implement the same framework with those 2 different teams. It just doesn't work. But thanks, Eddie. That's a great topic.
Adi, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
See you soon.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.